everybody, I'm Joe, and today I'm here to do something a little bit different this time. I'm here today to talk about some of my personal favorite war movies to watch on Veterans Day. Veterans Day, for those of you who don't know, is a holiday here in the United States where we pay tribute to those who are currently serving in our armed forces, whether they serve now or if they served at one point in the past, such as fighting in World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Desert Storm, the Iraq War, or Afghanistan since 9/11. And I'm sure there's a couple other countries, depending on where you live, that they do have a similar holiday where they honor those who are serving in their armed forces as well. But I'm just speaking from my perspective as an American, since we as Americans hold our military in a very high regard. And I'm not going to be specific, but I am serving in the military as of right now for the last 3 years or so. And my sister's also serving in the military. My dad served in the Navy back in the late 70s, early 80s. His dad served in Korea, my grandfather, and my mom's dad served in the Army too, around the time of the Korean War, although he didn't fight in the war. It's a little bit of a tradition in my family, so to speak, about serving in the US military. So Veterans Day is a very important thing to me, especially war movies, particularly the World War II side of things. There are a couple other war movies around the spectrum, and I'll briefly name them as I go on, but I'm just going to talk about some of my top choices. I'll briefly mention my top choices by name and maybe what I like about them, either way, because I think there is something you could take away from each one of them. American Sniper, Lone Survivor, Platoon, We Were Soldiers, Casualties of War, and Flags of Our Fathers by Clint Eastwood. And those are just my honorable mentions, so to speak, because it's a long list, and to rank them over each other, I'm going to be here all day, and I don't really like ranking movies or TV shows over the other. But I'm going to talk to you about some of my top choices that I either like to watch on either Veterans Day or Memorial Day. And there's going to be some minor spoilers in here, so if you have not seen any of these, don't watch this video. But I'll try to keep my spoilers as minimal as I can. My first pick, The Big Red One by Sam Fuller, I believe that's his name, starring Lee Marvin, Mark Hamill, and Robert Carradine. The Big Red One focuses on Lee Marvin's character, known as the Sergeant. He's never given a name in the movie except for Sergeant. The movie opens with him fighting in World War I, at the end of World War I, where he stabs a German soldier who's pleading in German, "Don't shoot, the war's over," but yet he stabs him anyway because he doesn't know that the war is over until he meets his commanding officer and finds out that he was right. The war is over, and he feels bad for still killing a soldier even though the war was over. Then the movie cuts to 1942, where he's serving with the 1st Infantry Division of the U.S. Army, known as the Big Red One, considering the red one that they wear on their shoulder patch, hence the Big Red One, and they're about to land in North Africa, and it chronicles their stories from fighting in Africa, to Sicily, Normandy, and France, to Belgium, and then later in Germany, towards the end of the war. And besides the character of the Sergeant, you got other characters like Zab, Griff, Johnson, and Vinci, and a couple other faces come in and out of here throughout the movie, but it's mostly replacements. And there's also a little bit of focus on this other German soldier called Schroeder, as they say in German, Schröder. That's my best German impression. I don't know how to... I'm sorry, I'm not good at German. Giving you a little bit of a different perspective from his side of the war rather than the American side. From what I understand, this is based on the filmmaker's own personal experiences from fighting in a war, if I'm not mistaken, if I remember correctly. From fighting in Africa, Sicily, Normandy, Belgium, and Germany, all 5 of these guys managed to survive their entire time fighting in the war, all going through their own little personal struggles along the way. Mostly the one that comes to mind is Mark Hamill's character, Griff. This movie came out in 1980, in the same year as Empire Strikes Back. Now this is a really different type of character that he's played at that point. And he was really good as Luke Skywalker, but to see him play a soldier that's very troubled, and he is thrown into the situation where he has to kill somebody, and he's not really sure if he can face his fear and kill the enemy before he kills him. And as he says to the sergeant at one point, "I can't murder anybody." But the sergeant goes, "We don't murder, we kill." And in a way, he does have a point. I mean, it's war. There's gonna be killing in a war. But he still does his job, and at one point when he's in Sicily, he does almost take the opportunity to run, but then he doesn't. But then, in Normandy on D-Day, when he's about to put an explosive device inside a barbed wire, he gets too scared because of machine gun fire. The sergeant fires a little bit past him, saying, "Hey, stop being so scared and do your job." I mean, that's the look he has on his face, and Griff's like, "Yeah, you're right." And he goes in and he does his job, so he overcomes his demons in that way. I mean, it's a very subtle type of portrayal, and I really like how Mark Hamill plays his character in this movie. And everybody else in the movie gets their moments to shine, like the character of Zab, who's the narrator, and guys like Johnson, especially in the great scene when they're inside a tank delivering a baby. Oh, man. Just thinking about it, I'm laughing. And the movie ends with this one whole moral message about the glory of war. What's the real glory of war? Whether or not you survive the war. You kill the enemy before he kills you. And I like that overall message in the movie. Even if your side doesn't win, you're still alive, aren't you? You live to tell the tale. you get another chance to live again. And I think that's a really good message right there. My next choice is A Bridge Too Far. Came out in 1977 based on the book of the same name, directed by the late Richard Attenborough, who famously played John Hammond in Jurassic Park. A Bridge Too Far, in case you don't know the story, is based on an operation called Operation Market Garden that took place in September of 1944, about a few months after the Normandy invasion, where the Allies, the British and the Americans and the Polish, were doing all these parachute drops into this deep hostile territory in Holland and the Netherlands to take these key bridges in these areas, hold them for the British tanks to roll in, take each bridge at a time, looking for an opening into Germany, invading Germany, and ending the war early by Christmas of 1944. Unfortunately, this plan didn't work out because they couldn't secure the final bridge in Arnhem, which was the final stop, because by the time they got to the in-between point from Nijmegen and Arnhem, the Germans stopped them dead cold. Plus, they're on this long highway, about 62 miles long total, right behind the enemy lines in open, flat areas, so it's not exactly an ideal place to do it. And plus, they had to do it within 2 to 3 days. Well, the battle lasted at least a week. Needless to say, this was not a carefully thought out plan, and I think maybe they should have taken a little more time with it, but I digress. It's a really good movie, and it's basically, if you're looking for something that's very meaningful, there are some moments in there where it has a good meaning to it, but it's not really so much a story arc, I would say. It's more of an account of what happened in this particular battle. And this movie has a huge cast. I mean, look up this movie on IMDb. You'll be surprised at how many people are in this movie. James Caan, Michael Caine, Edward Fox, Elliot Gould, Laurence Olivier, Liv Ullmann, Ryan O'Neal, Robert Redford, Sean Connery, Anthony Hopkins, Gene Hackman. Yeah, if I try to name all the rest of these people, I'm going to be here too long. I'd say this movie is definitely worth seeing if you're into war movies. There is a certain point where it does feel like it's dragging, but if you just stay patient enough, it'll all work out in the end. My next choice, Fury, written and directed by David Ayer, starring Brad Pitt, Logan Lerman, Jon Bernthal, Michael Pena, and Shia LaBeouf. This movie came out about a year ago last year. The response was mostly positive, but there was a lot of criticism towards the characters. I can understand where those people are coming from, but I didn't really mind it at all. I found it had just the right amount of camaraderie and a little bit of backstory where you understood where these characters are coming from and what the overall main theme of this movie is. It's not an entirely original theme, but it's a very effective one. Whether or not the Germans are all bad, because there is a great scene where Logan Lerman's character Norman and Brad Pitt's character War Daddy go to have some breakfast in this German family's house, and they treat them very nicely. They give them this warm food and so on, and Logan Lerman's character bonds with this nice German girl, Emma. Then the rest of the tank crew comes in and causes a ruckus and embarrasses themselves. But I do like the overall main message of this movie, that not every German believed in Nazism, which definitely shows in this one scene towards the end, after the big end battle, which is really riveting to watch. The character Norm by Logan Lerman is the only one that survives the battle, as far as his tank crew. He hides underneath the tank, and this one young German soldier sees him, but doesn't tell anybody yet, and Norman has his look on his face saying, "Don't. Please don't tell them." The German thinks for a second, looks around, and he leaves him be. Doesn't say a word. And some people were quick to criticize, but that would never happen. That would never happen. Well, how do you know? You think every German was willing to pull their gun out and just blow somebody's head off? Even on the enemy side, they are human beings, and they're just fighting for their country too. And the action scenes for a war movie are surprisingly most riveting action scenes I've ever seen. Particularly the scene where they're fighting a German Tiger tank, and they're shooting at each other, one trying to outmaneuver the other. I remember I literally was sitting in the theater, gripping my chair. Shoot him. Shoot him! Watch it! No, no, no! And it had music in there too, and usually when music like this happens during a battle scene, it comes off as a bit glorifying and showy, but this is some kind of intense music, which is done by Stephen Price. Well done, Stephen Price. It puts you on the edge, gets you right into it, and it builds that suspension up really well, especially towards the end of that tank battle. And not to mention, the overall tone of this movie is very, very raw and really brutal also. There's a lot of grotesque moments in here, and considering it's David Ayer, who also did End of Watch, and he's doing Suicide Squad pretty soon, let me just advise you, don't eat any snacks or drink any drinks while you watch this movie. This is not exactly something where you could chuck popcorn in your face. And then my next pick, Letters from Iwo Jima, directed by Clint Eastwood, which is a counterpart to Flags of Our Fathers. It shows you the Japanese side of the Battle of Iwo Jima. Now, from what I remember, it's been a little while, but I can remember it vividly. There's one scene that stands out in my mind where this one Japanese officer, after they capture a U.S. Marine for a little while, they give him some water, and eventually he dies of dehydration and hunger. This Japanese officer picks up the letter that this U.S. Marine wrote to his mother back home, and since the Japanese officer speaks English, he translates it out loud to his soldiers who are listening in. He translates it, and I love the look that every soldier has on his face as they're hearing this letter. They just look at each other and just go, wow, this this guy's no different from us. Because, you have all these images built up in your mind about the enemy. Like, we had a lot of images back then of the Japanese being like these big samurai warriors, these murderous type of people since the kamikaze attacks and all that stuff. But when you break it down, they had normal lives just like we did. They had families, they had jobs, they were just normal people. And the Japanese probably had similar stereotypes in their heads too back then, fighting us. Like, we were cowboys, we were blowhards. And then when they hear this letter, they just go, this guy's just a normal guy. I may like it a little bit better than Flags of Our Fathers, but I still like Flags of Our Fathers. But I think the thing that really gives it that oomph is because it shows you the Japanese perspective of World War II. And that's something you don't usually see in a war movie like this. And now we're down to my last two choices, which, oddly enough, are sitting right behind me. My next choice, Saving Private Ryan by Steven Spielberg, starring Tom Hanks, Tom Sizemore, Matt Damon, Barry Pepper, and Vin Diesel, long before he became Groot. And is set during the time of the invasion of Normandy, where Captain John Miller, played by Tom Hanks, is an Army Ranger who's sent on a mission to go behind enemy lines with his men to find a man named Private James Ryan with the 101st Airborne, whose three other brothers were serving in the military around that time too, and they were all killed within 2 days of each other, making him the last surviving member of his family to go on and continue his family's lineage, so to speak. So General George C. Marshall in Washington authorizes this mission, find this guy, and get him home. And during the entire time, when they're trying to find Private Ryan, they all question whether or not this is all worth it. Why should we risk our own men for just one guy? And they do make a good point, but at the same time, I can't help but just go, you know what, guys? He didn't ask you to come find him, okay? He didn't ask for his brothers to get killed and for you to find him. But that's just me being all nitpicky and all that stuff. But besides all that stuff, it's a really basic story, like a search and rescue mission. But there's so many moments where it really gets you into these characters like Captain John Miller, the character of Wade by Giovanni Ribisi, who is their medic, talks about how he would often pretend he was asleep when his mother came home and how he regrets not being able to talk to his mother after that and how he might not be able to see his mother again. It's talk about tears, man. My goodness. And there is one scene, whenever I watch this movie, I always fast forward it. When this German soldier takes a bayonet and he stabs this other guy in the chest and he's talking to him. Yeah, no. Not only does it make me sick, it makes me mad. So I'm not even going to get into that stuff. Just thinking about it just makes me twitch. And the final scene with Captain John Miller telling Private Ryan, saying, earn this. I'm gonna cry thinking about it if I just keep going on. It makes me bawl like a baby every time I watch it. And considering this movie is set during World War II and it was made by the man, Steven Spielberg, the action in this movie is probably arguably the best action that you'll ever see in a war movie. Particularly that opening scene on the Normandy coastline. The moment the doors open on the boats and they're getting shot. I remember it vividly. Watching this on VHS when I was about 10, 12 years old. My dad was watching it with me. And the moment the door opened and the bullets started hitting the soldiers, my jaw hit the floor. I just went... And I also remember watching with my mom the first time. The moment that happened, she was stunned. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. And of course the final battle with the German Tiger tank rolling through the town and the gunshots. And there's so many continuous stuff going on and the camera shaking around. But it all feels like you're there. And Steven Spielberg somehow manages to find the right combination of filmmaking to put you right in that moment and make you feel like you're there. And where I work, my boss is a Vietnam veteran. He told me about what he thought of this movie and he said, that movie got everything right. And finally, with my number one pick. Now, this is not a movie. This is a miniseries that aired on HBO in 2001, created by Steven Spielberg and Tom Hanks, starring a various number of people, Band of Brothers. Band of Brothers is a 10-part miniseries telling the story of Easy Company and the 101st Airborne Division. And over the course of the 10 episodes, it shows you their training, fighting in Normandy, fighting in Holland, fighting in Belgium, and their occupation of Germany as the war was coming to a close. And since this is focused on a company-sized unit, it's about 3-4 platoons per company, as it was back then, and it still is today, as far as Army standards go, and Marine Corps, depending on what section you're looking at. Each episode gives you a certain character to focus on, like character of Major Winters, who is a real-life person, unfortunately has passed away, played by Damian Lewis, who you may recognize from Homeland. A couple episodes given a large focus, but then there's other episodes, like Part 3, Carentan. You focus on Private Blythe, and how he has to overcome his fear of dying in combat, and at one point he becomes becomes hysterically blind because he's so terrified of what could happen to him. Part 4 focuses on the character of Sergeant Randleman, played by Michael Cudlitz. Part 6, you focus on Doc Rowe, who is a medic. Part 7, you focus on character of First Sergeant Lipton, played by Donnie Wahlberg. Episode 8, Private David Webster, played by Eon Bailey. Episode 9, Ron Livingston's character, Captain Nixon. And then Episode 10, you focus back on Major Winters. And each time they focus on a certain character, it gives you a little bit of a unique perspective on how they view the war and the situation that they're dealt with and how they're dealing with it. Now, Major Winters doesn't start off as a major. He starts off as a lieutenant, then he's promoted to captain, and then he's promoted to major over the course of his service in the war and in the army. And how he, in my opinion, becomes one of my personal heroes, the perfect example of what a leader should be. Now, I don't have the book with me, but I read his autobiography, and I also read another biography that was wrote about him called Biggest Brother. If you want to check that out, read it. It's a really good book, including his autobiography. And I wish I had his list of 10 principles of leadership, but one that really sticks out in my mind: don't worry about who receives the credit, don't let power or authority get to your head. That's a perfect example of how to be a good leader, and especially in any kind of position, whether or not you're very famous and you got all this attention, don't let that stuff get to your head, because you'll become very self-centered. And Damian Lewis, he is perfect as Major Winters. I can't really see anybody else playing that character. And then you got other actors like Donnie Wahlberg as Sergeant Lipton, Ron Livingston as Captain Nixon, and you also got Michael Fassbender in here in a very small role, and James McAvoy's in here too. Nice little place to start off, right? Including a special appearance by Tom Hardy in episodes 9 and 10. Look for him. He's very scrawny compared to how huge and buff he is right now. It's insane. But like with Saving Private Ryan, this has probably some of the best war sequences you'll ever see. And it doesn't feel showy, it doesn't feel glorified, it feels real, and it feels like you're right there in the fight sometimes. Particularly, my favorite battle scene in the entire series has to be the tank battle in episode 3, where they're outside of this town, Carentan. They manage to secure it, but then the Germans come in and counterattack and try to take the area back, and their tanks come up over the side of the hill to try to push them back into the town and take the town back. But then, out of nowhere, US American tanks come in and scare them off. The entire time, it lasts about 8 minutes to 9 minutes long, but every time I watch it, my eyes are glued right to the screen from beginning to end. There are so many great moments in this series, and if I even try to talk about every single one of them, I'm going to be here all day. That's about all I got for my favorite war movies or TV series. I haven't seen the Pacific in its entirety yet, but I really want to revisit it again. And I heard that Spielberg and Hanks are working on another miniseries about the 8th Air Force and their bombing raids over Europe. I'd be all for seeing that as well. So thank you all for watching this video. Let me know what your favorite war movies are down below, whether it's a top 10, top 5, or if you just have 1 or 2 favorites. And have a happy Veterans Day, everybody.